Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Finally, my dad stopped nagging me, so now I can actually fucking get on with this. Oh, man alive. But I hope everyone is doing well, most importantly. Now I just need to remember off the top of my head where I left off, and then I'll be with you shortly. Alright, I think I've just about got myself into the right position. So, without further ado, let's get the show on the road. So, this is from page 196, about halfway down. The final step in this process of globalization and the money bubble was the creation of the petrodollar in 1974. Maybe you've never heard of the petrodollar, but you can't find hundreds of books on you can find hundreds of books on the topic if you look, including books published by the US government and news reports by the major financial press. In the 1960s, there were financial analysts who thought that the state of the US currency, the anchor to many other currencies, was signaling the death of the dollar. That this death was premature is a testament to the power of the petrodollar. The single most common way of measuring the size of an economy is known as GDP, or Gross Domestic Product. The Bank of England states that GDP is a measure of the size and health of a country's economy over a period of time. If GDP goes up, this is considered a good thing. The bank goes on to say that GDP is composed of four things: household spending. Your current version of WinSip is out of date. Fuck off. Anyway, it's number one is household spending, 2 is investment, 3 is government spending, and 4 is the value of exports minus imports. It should be obvious. If the money supply is increased, inflated, GDP goes up. And if the government uses created money or increased taxes or increased borrowing, then GDP goes up. The Bank of England's explanation of GDP goes on to say, if UK GDP rose by 2% next year, but the population grew by 4%, then the average income per person would actually have fallen. Finally, there are things which raise GDP that don't make the country better off. War is one example. A lot of money is spent, so GDP goes up. So if the government increases the size of the population by importing more people, then GDP goes up, but on average the population gets poorer. If more people require government spending, then GDP goes up. Government spends more money on schools, hospitals, welfare benefits for the immigrants, etc., etc. Moreover, think about how GDP is currently being increased across the West by governments such as USA, the UK, etc., funding the war in Ukraine. It is in the oligarchy's interest to make more and more personal interactions into the West into financial transactions. The oligarchy can then tax these interactions and claim that GDP has gone up, that the country is richer. Thus, having mothers go to work, with yet other people being paid to care for their children, fits this pattern of financialization of personal interactions. This doesn't just apply to the taxes on the income of the mother from work, but also on the income and other taxes paid by the people who care for her children. Since 1973, the government has extracted a sales tax somewhere between 5 and 20% on virtually every transaction involving money. The more business relationships that exist between people, the more money the state is able to extract from the public. If you remember, we've mentioned the socialist economic Lord Keynes several times. The concept of GDP was invested after World War II, where Keynesian economics had come to dominate in the West. The very act of measuring GDP, as we do, gives the high and easily intellectual ground to those of the Keynesian persuasion. What is the essence of Keynesian economics? The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, provides the summary. The sum of spending by households, businesses, and the government is the most important driving force in an economy. Keynes further asserted that free markets have no self-balancing mechanisms that lead to full employment. Keynesian economists, I don't know how I did that one wrong, justify government intervention through public policies that aim to achieve full employment and price stability. Thus, Keynesianism prioritizes government interventions, which is state planning by an elite of humans, over relying on the millions of decisions by millions of consumers and businesses to bring about the best results. So the measure known as GDP is integral to the state planning of economies in the West. So the more money a government spends, the bigger is an economy, supposedly. So let's use the economic measure used by the state planners of the money bubble. If you look at the chart showing the UK GDP from 1960 to 2019, you will see that the average growth in GDP for the period was 2.42%. If you look at the charts for inflation in the UK between 1960 and 2019, the average median inflation was supposedly 3.43% per year. Thus, even with the government manipulating inflation statistics, prices have been systematically outstripping GDP. Moreover, how is it that the average price of a house in 1969 was less than £4,000, but in 2019 the average was £230,000? If 4,000 is compounded annually, stroke number one, annually by 3.43% for 50 years, it is 21,596. You can perform this calculation for yourself online. Well, I was doing so well not having strokes for a long time. What a shame. Anyway, yet after 50 years, house prices were more than 10 times higher than that. If you use that online calculator to deduce what house price inflation has been over these 50 years, you will see that it's been around 9% per year. That's about 9% every year for 50 years. Something similar can be done with other tangible assets, such as gold. Although the government, central banks, financial advisors, and financial journalists have had a policy of steering people away from gold, manipulating the price down as a way to keep the money bubble inflated. Between 1971 and 2019, the average increase in the price of gold, aggregated across all the major currencies, was 7.3% per year. Pretty close to the average increase in house prices in the UK. Without this organised manipulation of the price of gold, it's obvious the average increase in the price of gold would have been higher. If there is a return to the gold standard, then we will all look back on the current price of gold as cheap. These increases in the cost of tangible assets show us how the money bubble has inflated the price of goods far beyond what the stroke number two, what the oligarchy tell you the rate of inflation has been. God almighty. The headline inflation figure is lower through several factors. Products coming from abroad that cost less to produce. Number two, technical advances. And three, statistical manipulation. Thus, we might be getting cheaper furniture, clothes, electronic devices, etc., imported from Asian countries, but the cost of things like houses and golds are a better indication of the true level of inflation, i.e., the size by which the money bubble has been inflated. When this bubble bursts, we should expect to see a very significant decline in the price of housing in the West and beyond. But as we saw in the response to the crisis from 2006 to 2008, governments will go to astonishing levels to stop the money bubble from deflating. Governments want the public to divert money into financial institutions so that the oligarchy can cream off of a percentage from transactions. The more money that is fed into the money bubble, the more money the oligarchy can make. But the money invested by the financial institutions, including a pension fund, is not safe. Ask the people who've lost significant portions of their pensions when the world's oldest, most boring pension company, Equitable Life, founded in 1762, collapsed in 2001. Instead of saving $2,000 per year in that pension company from 1975, by the time it collapsed in 2001, the investor could instead have had about 250 ounces of gold, which is nearly £500,000 at today's prices, and this is the price despite the decades of price suppression by the oligarchy. You can be sure that in addition to owning property, art, stocks and crypto, the oligarchy will own gold. They just want your money invested in institutions where they can profit from it. In a crisis, their interests are diversified, and their chums in government and the media will go out, go. Fucking hell, nearly had stroke number 3 there. Will go out of their way to help them. You'll be the last to know that danger is imminent and your investments are at risk. You may think your money is safe in banks, but there are several very good reasons why you should doubt this. Firstly, in 2009, governments across the EU, including the UK, passed new laws to say that in the event of banks going bust in future, rather than taxpayers being forced by government to bail out banks, customer money in those banks beyond a certain limit will be taken from the customers. In place of their money, those customers will be given shares in the banks. This is called a bail-in, for any money in their account in excess of £85,000. The level at which this bail-in applies relates to deposits over 85 grand, which, admittedly, to most of us seems like a lot of money, but bear this in mind. In the summer of 2009, gold was £570 an ounce. Now, it's £1,840 an ounce. So we're talking well over 3 times what it used to be. When this law was passed by £85,000, would buy 150 ounces of gold. I don't know why I stopped there. Now it will buy 46 ounces of gold. So again, just over 3 times what they could have had. None of this is to say that those who had their wealth stored in housing or gold have cast iron guarantees. In the last century, both in the UK and the USA, governments have made the ownership of gold illegal. When economic conditions are bad enough, the oligarchy will happily commandeer the property of the people. This asset grab will resemble Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1933 confiscation of citizens' gold and subsequent 70% devaluation of the dollar, with one big difference. In 1933, the government didn't know where all the gold was, and gold owned by Americans outside the United States was not confiscated. So it was possible for citizens to ignore FDR's demand and keep their gold. This time, the government knows exactly where every financial account is located and what it contains, making it virtually impossible to sidestep any confiscation. The Socialist government of Britain in 1966 made it illegal for anyone to own more than 4 gold coins without a special dispensation. Physical property isn't safe from predation by the state. Even if you own a freehold property with no mortgage, when the economic problems are bad enough, the oligarchy will raise the property taxes on your home. If you don't pay these, they will put a charge on your home. That is, they will own part of the value obtained when the home is sold. Thus, even the least risky of assets are vulnerable to the oligarchy. Don't be surprised if the younger adults who can't afford to own a house ally with the oligarchy if and when the latter decide they are going to take the rest of the property into state ownership. Remember, in the iron heel that opponents of the oligarchy found the financial system came after houses that were owned outright. Because of globalization, China has become an immensely rich economy. With all the excess dollars accumulating there, China has been buying up resources around the world. Ports, mines, agricultural land, oil fields. Moreover, internally it has become the largest miner of gold in the world. And the output of these mines stay in China. Moreover, with the price of gold suppressed by the oligarchy in the West, China has been buying gold on the open market on a vast scale. By some estimates, it imports clearly 600 tons through Hong Kong in 2012 and over 1,000 tons in 2013. At this pace of accumulation, it will soon, if it doesn't already, have gold reserves exceeding 4,000 tons, sufficient to rank its reserves among the world's largest. China is gaining the ability, in short, to back its currency with gold. An act that would give the yuan instant global credibility as a store of value and seriously challenge the purely fiat and therefore inferior dollar as a medium of exchange. This backing of currency by real assets appears to be a core strategic principle of the BRICS Chinese-Russian alliance. In the passage above, it was an estimate of China's state bank gold holdings in 2013. Some experts judged that 10 years later, China alone now has some 15,000 tons of gold, far more than it officially acknowledges it has, possibly even as much as 31,000 tons. The USA is thought to have 8,000 tons, Germany 3,352, Italy 2,451, and the UK has 310 ounces. And I'm getting messaged by my friend Martin. Anyway, if you think that gold doesn't matter to national economies, here is what the Wikipedia article says about gold reserves, and I quote, During most of history, a nation's gold reserves were considered its key financial asset and a major prize of war. End quote. Countries now often store their gold abroad for safety. Venezuela has gold stored with the Bank of England when Venezuela sought to get the gold back from Britain. The Bank of England refused to return it. In 2013, Germany's central bank sought to repatriate its gold from the USA and France. In the aftermath, stroke number 3, in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis and the 2010 sovereign debt crisis in Europe, another scare emerged that there might be less gold in the foreign vaults than claimed because it had been tinkered with, or that Germany might not be able to retrieve it. It took Germany years just to get stop blacking out on me, to get back a small part of the gold they stored abroad with friendly countries. Moreover, after the West began seizing those Russian assets within the grasp of Western governments, even more countries started to repatriate their gold from the safety, in air quotes, of the Western banks. Russia's gold reserves were wisely held in Russia, meaning that it was only other types of asset that the West was able to steal from Russia. Just as the housing market is manipulated by governments, central banks and other financial institutions, so too are other kinds of assets. For decades, central banks, along with various other financial institutions, have been systematically intervening in the gold market to push down the exchange rate to the dollar and other currencies. They do this by covertly dumping central bank gold onto the market and instructing large commercial banks to sell huge numbers of gold futures contracts into thinly traded markets. Together, these secret machinations have held gold's exchange rate far below where a free market would have taken it. Gold's ability to signal market participants that inflation is rising and all national currencies are being mismanaged is being short-circuited. Why would they want to make gold appear cheaper and more volatile? Because in doing so, they can lead the public into thinking that their money should be invested somewhere that returns more interest or is safer. Rather than let an increase in the price of gold serve as an economic indicator, those who claim they can manage the climate interfere to manage the price of gold, that is, to deceive the public about economic reality. This is the kind of financial deception that is not entirely new. This is kind of? I think they might have done a grammar error here, sorry. This is a kind of financial deception that is not entirely new, I'd probably say, that is meant to say. Anyway, moving on. Manipulating the public's perceptions go to the very foundations of banking. The banking system evolved from goldsmiths issuing receipts for gold they had held for clients. These clients found that the receipts were handier than lugging around heavy coins or bars. But the goldsmiths' bankers also realised that most of the gold just stayed with them, and that they could issue more receipts, paper money, than they actually had gold in stock. This is known as fractional reserve banking. Banks needed to only hold a fraction of tangible value in relation to the quantity of paper money which they issued. From this arose central banks. Early in the development of fractional reserve banking, the system's inherent instability became apparent to the goldsmith. Okay, I've just read that word. Oh, shit. About the goldsmith scum. Yeah, goldsmith scum bankers. Because I don't really want to read out the other three letters, quite frankly. who, after all, were personally threatened by bank runs. They convinced governments to create a new kind of bank called a central bank, to act as a lender of the last resort to prevent banks' runs from spreading. The Bank of England, for example, was founded in 1694 when London bankers enticed the British monarchy, then near bankruptcy because of endless wars with France and rebellious Scots, to finance its military adventures with borrowed money. But from a banker's point of view, the central bank's real job was to prevent individual lenders' bad decisions from threatening the rest of the financial community. The central bank concept soon spread to the rest of Europe, and by the end of the 19th century, every major country except the United States had some form of central bank. And the US was not far behind. There's obviously vastly more detail to this story, but that's the bare bones of it. We need to understand the history of these systems if we are to understand their mechanisms to see where things are likely to go. Whilst you might expect financial analysts to be part of the oligarchy, particularly those in favour of gold against the money bubble, these distant analysts are saying things that are consistent with what has traditionally been seen as a view from the left. Thus, the authors of the money bubble wondered in 2013. But what if this time the people running the global economy aren't inept in history? This is stroke number 4. Historically clueless and historically incapable of avoiding strokes. What if they know exactly what they're doing and are quite far along in a plan to funnel the wealth of the world's middle and working classes into the accounts of the super rich and technically savvy? In the process, creating a separate culture that is to middle America what a middle America is to the village of 15th century peasants. They could see that the public are well on their way to serfdom. Do you not think it strange that the very people in the West most active in promoting immigration, anti-white racism, transgenderism, censorship, etc., are also that group of rich elitists, the billionaires and multi-millionaire techno-fascists, who own and staff Google, YouTube, Facebook, etc., basically the left-wing Silicon Valley groups, and until Musk sacked many of them, the same kind of people who ran Twitter. These techno-fascists work with New Labour and the Socialist parties in the UK, and the Democrats and the Republicans in name only in the USA. And when these political parties tell the techno-fascists to censor content and ban people, the techno-fascists oblige. Failed MPs in the UK, people with no business experience and no technological skills, move from politics to highly paid executive positions in these techno-fascist companies. What business expertise do you think that a lifetime politician brings with him, such as, I don't really want to call him sir, but devil's advocate here, I don't think he's as bad as some of these other people, Sir Nick Clegg. Contacts within the oligarchy is what they bring. It suits the politicians to have someone at the heart of techno-fascist stroke number 5. Techno-fascist censorship, just as it suits the billionaires of Silicon Valley to have the network of political contacts. In case you think the idea of being able to make predictions concerning political and economic events is bogus, in 2004, the authors of the money bubble advised people that there was coming a crisis in the bubble in house prices and that people should buy gold. In May 2004, gold was £210. Now I can't even fucking read properly. Was £210 an ounce. In the year the money bubble was published, in 2013, gold was around £900 an ounce. Thus, the authors were indeed ahead of the curve with their predictions. In this book, they make another prediction. Interest rates could spike, setting off a death spiral in the government finances, and or the implosion of a leveraged speculating community. This sudden loss of faith in the fiat currency is termed a crack-up boom. And historically, it spelled the end of the currency in question. Since today, fiat's currency regime is global, the transition, the crack-up boom, will be global as well. Oh my eye. The authors were once again right, but they were some years ahead of the curve. If anything, we would say their analysis was too tame. The Bank of England maintained their interest rate at an average of 0.5% from 2014 to 2021, but from 2021 the rate has gone from 0.1 to 5.25%, a 50-fold increase in less than 3 years. A spike indeed. The last time the base rate was as high as 5.25 was February 2008, during the Great Financial Crisis caused by the popping of the bubble in mortgage-backed investments. The average interest set up by the Bank of England in the 100 years leading up to 2023 was 8.3%. The average rate in the 50 years before 2023 was 9.1%. Thus, it seems likely that the spiking of interest rates from the fake money period in 2008 were interest rates that were practically zero, to the more normal rates of 5.25 in 2021 is likely, very likely, in fact, not over. It seems entirely reasonable to posit that interest rates in the UK should be returning to the mean, i.e. to between 8.3 and 9.1%. In which case many of the people will be paying off multi-decade mortgages at rates of above 10%. Fundamentally, there are two types of asset, or two types of wealth: tangible and financial, where the financial assets are those with counterparty risks. Tangible wealth is made up of real physical things like buildings, farmlands, oil wells, commodities, etc., which can be seen and touched, and crucially don't have counterparty risk. That is, no one else has to make good on a promise for a tangible asset to have value. Financial assets like bank deposits, insurance policies, bonds, and annuities do have stroke number 6, do have counterparty risk, which is to say they depend on someone else's promise. Thus, the less tangible your wealth is, the more at risk it is. But it's in the interest of the oligarchy that you should spend money, as the oligarchy gets the profit from all consumer activity, either A, as profit to the corporations from purchases, or B, as profit to the state taken as taxes. Furthermore, the wealth you do not spend in consumerism, the state pensions, annuities, etc., I've jumped a line ahead. In consumerism, the state encourages you to keep in financial assets, bank accounts, stock market, pensions, annuities, etc., because once again, the corporations have a chance to take a slice, at the very least by lending out your money to multiple other people and or by charging you fees, or the state gets to tax any increase in your wealth. In this way, it's not looking good, is it? Stroke number 7. In this way, the price of gold, silver, etc. must be made volatile in the currency of the state, so that you are more inclined to store any wealth you have in a riskier financialized assets. Oh dear, so 7 strokes so far. I make that a stroke now every 4 minutes coming up to. Not looking good. You can be sure that the oligarchy have their wealth in a wide range of safe assets and risky assets. The oligarchy own and run both the corporation and the state. Thus, governments, central banks, and commercial banks all collude to make the price of gold volatile, which stops it from functioning as a signal that wealth should be put in safer assets. When the financialized economy shows signs of distress, paper gold is bought, to push down the price of real gold. When they have steadied the financialized economy again, the paper gold can be sold, and now the signal of gold is not being looked at, the price of real gold can quietly rise. If they could do this with housing without causing civil unrest, they would do so. Some on the left might argue they would do this with housing, but over a time scale of decades. The ability to create huge amounts of fictional money allowed governments to extend the welfare state. It also led to the hitherto unknown credit availability. For example, before the 1970s, credit cards were virtually unknown, and household debt was far, far lower than it is today. Because before the money bubble, credit was much harder to get. In the 1970s, it was unheard of for anyone other than the very wealthy to have anything that resembled a credit card. The idea of easy credit may seem great. However, the principal effect of increases in the supply of money is inflation. If you consult the Oxford English Dictionary of 1971 to see the definition of inflation, it says, increase beyond proper limits, ESP of prices, the issue of paper money, etc. The explanation is really that simple. There could be a rise in the price of specific objects. For example, I have a feeling this is speaking out to someone. Two people, in fact. And you're staring at them. Anyway, for example, the cost of chocolate increasing because of a bad cocoa harvest, or because I bought the whole stock. But when the price of virtually everything is going up, generic inflation, then the cause, is an increase in the supply of money. It's just more fictional money chasing and more or less static supply of real objects. Where's my chocolate? Those people who profit from there being more money are the people who have an incentive to stroke number 8, who seek to deceive you about the cause of inflation. Governments have progressively adopted more complicated ways to tell you what inflation is so that they can more easily deceive you. There are significant state payments which are tied to the level of inflation. So there is one more reason why it is in the interest of the state to pretend that the inflation is lower than it is. With changes to the measuring system every few years, it is virtually impossible to compare the inflation of 1970, when the pound sterling was tied to gold, with the inflation of today's money bubble. After all, the changes in definitions and No! Stroke number 9! Oh my god, we're reaching a new record at this rate. In definitions and complicated calculations. The oligarchy present the public with a simple deception of inflation is lower than in the 1970s. Remember in Animal Farm how the managerial elite of pigs lied to the farmed animals and lied to the human farmers about the state of the farm's finances. Since the pound sterling has been around for nearly 1,000 years, there are ways in which we can easily demonstrate what the oligarchy have done to the people of Britain over the last 120 or so years. Below is a chart from the National Archive showing what quantities of objects and services could be bought for £1,000 across 5 centuries. So in the 1600s, I'm going to go actually down the list as far as how much you could buy is concerned. I'm going to start with one column of one type of product, and I'm going down in the list of years here. So, horses. In the 1600s, you could buy 121 of them for £1,000. In the 1700s, or 17th century rather, you can buy 185. Then, in the 1800s, you could only buy 95, 1900s 36, and in the 20th century, you couldn't buy any horses for £1,000. For cows, in the 16th century, you could buy 537 of them. Then it was only 240 in the 17th, 200 in the 18th, 103 in the 19th century, and only 2 cows for £1,000 in the 20th century. For wool, I don't know if that's grams or like batches or whatever, but wool in the 1600s, you could get 2,941 of those. In the 1700s, 1,666. 18th century, 1,111. In the 19th century, it actually went up to 1851, and then it massively went back down to 186 in the 20th century. And then wheat was basically, the 16th century was 555, 17th century 500, 18th century is 175. There was a massive spike on this one as well. 19th century you could get 781 units of wheat, and then 2000 you could only get 57. And finally, days of wages for £1,000 in the 16th century was 20,000. In 1700s, or the 17th century, it was 11,111. In the 18th century, it was 6,666. I'm sure the devil loved that one, didn't he? The 19th century was 3,030 days of wages, and then the 20th century, £1,000 could get you 17 days of wages. So as you can see, Generally, the value of £1,000 has dropped by about 50% every 100 years. Occasionally, in some periods, the purchasing power of the period went up in value relative to some items due to technology, weather, and trade, etc. But across all these basic items, the value dropped off a cliff between the 19th century and the 20th century. In 1900, £1,000 would buy you 3,030 days of skilled labour. But 100 oh no, stroke number 10, we're in danger here. But 100 years later, it would only buy 17 days. Ask yourself, 25 years later, how many days of skilled labour can I buy for £1,000? In 2024, it's probably 3 days or less. You can see from the simplicity of this table why the oligarchy make it so complicated to calculate inflation, so that you can easily demonstrate that they have massively debased the currency. All their interactions with the public are designed to mislead you and to redirect your attention away from what is truly important. Your relative impoverishment is much greater than these statistics demonstrate. Whilst their bogus statistics will claim that your wealth is slightly... No! Stroke number 11. Increased slightly, the same statistics show that they've got vastly richer. In England in 1964, a 30-year-old uneducated plumber could buy a small house for £300 cash. He had a wife and 3 children and had been living in rented accommodation for the previous 5 years. That same, not particularly desirable house is currently priced now at £140,000. It's basically the cheapest house in the town. That's the effect of the money bubble. Do you think a young plumber under the age of 30 with 4 dependents could now afford to pay rent and save up £140,000 to buy such a house for cash? There was really no welfare benefits in 1964 that those in work could receive. No housing benefit, no minimum wage, no tax credits, no income tax, no VAT, no money back, no... Sorry, no, back on topic. Stop singing Fools and Horses. In that town, other basic houses, slightly larger, were priced at more than twice as much. This deception about wealth is not just confined to the UK, but, for example, also applies to the USA. After decades of statistical manipulation, the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, no longer measures the cost of maintaining a constant standard of living. Instead, it measures the cost of a declining standard of living in which consumers are constantly assumed to switch from their first choice to their second or third choices among life's necessities. Meanwhile, because Social Security payments and many other pensions of wage agreements are tied to the CPI, would you stop blacking out? This deliberate understatement of official inflation lowers the real incomes of participants in these programs, in most cases without their knowledge or understanding. Is it any wonder that the UK government uses a 114-page document to explain how they calculate inflation? Furthermore, by systematically understanding inflation, the government systematically overstates GDP. In the 17th century, there was the tulip bubble, in Holland, a tulip mania. We know it will sound like insanity. A single bulb for a tulip could cost as much as 12 acres. Fucking hell! Cost as much as 12 acres of land. We're in the wrong fucking business, boys. We should have been picking tulips. In our opinion, the entire world of cryptocurrencies fits this description of a mania. As of 2024, there were 23,000 cryptocurrencies, yet Bitcoin didn't even start until 2009. So in a short 15 years, nearly £2 trillion has been invested into this asset. Some people have created joke cryptocurrencies to mock the whole nonsense behind this market, only to find out that people started to buy their joke coins, and in 2021, they were valued at £50 billion. Do you remember the bubble in this ridiculous scam over NFTs, or non-fungible tokens? All of these are a sign that the crack-up boom has arrived. The current situation is so insane that it is beyond satire. Obese drag queens were the stars of the opening ceremony of the Paris 2024 Olympics, including a mockery of Christianity. Perhaps you think that smart people can see through a bubble and can see that cryptocurrencies are not a bubble. Well, Isaac Newton is considered one of the greatest minds of all time, and yet he lost a fortune in the South Sea bubble. Newton was not just a mathematician, astronomer, or physicist, he was also a member of Parliament, the member of Treasury, and spent the last 3 decades of his life as the head of the Royal Mint, the institution that actually issued the gold and silver coinage. It was while he was at the centre of London's financial system that he lost his wealth in the South Sea bubble. Bubbles don't just deflate gradually, they burst. Suddenly, people realised that what was too good to be true was indeed a mass delusion, but there was no way the oligarchy are unaware of the money bubble. If normal people are lucky they realise that it's a bubble bursting, and if they sell the bubble assets fast, the losses will be limited. It's this attempt to get out quickly that causes the bubble to burst suddenly. Another sign that we have been living through the crack-up boom is the project in Britain known as the High Speed 2, or HS2. HS1 arrived in Britain in 2003, when the 67-mile rail line between London and the Channel Tunnel was opened. In the wake of fake money created to prevent the subprime mortgage bubble from bursting and leading to the global financial system collapsing, in 2010, the UK government began HS2, a high-speed train line to connect London, Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds. By October 2023, most of the project had been cancelled, and a rump of the project was to be completed, going from the outer regions of London to the outer regions of Birmingham. As each year passed, the estimated costs escalated significantly. 36 billion in 2013, 57 billion in 2014, 88 billion in 2019, and in 2020, 98 billion pounds. One 2020 estimate even puts the cost at 106 billion pounds, a vanity project that wastes taxpayers' money. Remember the windmill and Animal Farm? It was due to the sweat of the farmed animals that eventually brought it into being. But they never got any benefit from the years of labour. Mark Twain is usually credited with the observation, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes." However, when it comes to economics, history doesn't repeat itself. There are literally hundreds of books on economic cycles. Why else study past economic events and then make economic policies and predicted outcomes if economists don't believe these things go in cycles? Modern economists believe that they are pulling the levers of a machine with predictable outcomes. It's just that the modern economics is stroke number 12 is predicated on the belief that there is no point in worrying about what will happen in a few decades because, as the Fabian Lord Keynes said, in the long run we're all dead. Normally, economics talk about effects that will occur in the short run, the medium term, and the long run, but not with Fabian philosophy. Their deception requires the public not understanding what the Fabian long-term plan means. The oligarchy plans or claims they can control the climate, so naturally they believe they can control economic cycles. Most of you may not be aware of how extraordinary the economic manipulation of recent decades has been. However, similar manipulation has been tried before and has always ended in disaster. In most cases, this play has consisted of 3 acts. Excessive fuck me, senseless stroke number 13 of excessive borrowing, blow-off inflationary bubble, and catastrophic economic crash. And every few generations, most major countries stage a new version, with different actors, but the same general storyline. In carrying out this kind of fraud, the oligarchy must wait a few generations until the public have once again forgotten what happened in the past or have been spun a yarn by experts. It assists the oligarchy when the younger generation are taught that those older than them are ignorant, stupid, or don't understand progress. Moreover, there are plenty of people who work in finance who will dismiss these warnings, but they would say that they are benefiting from the financialization of the public's wealth. As socialist Upton Sinclair said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. After the crisis of the 1960s, which resulted in gold being drained from the USA by nations trading with the USA, there was the oil crisis and inflation of the 1970s, then the severe recession of the 1980s and early 1990s. But towards the end of the 1990s, there was a crisis in Asian economies in 1997, followed by the implosion of a hedge fund named Long-Term Capital Management in 1998. Then, financially, the dot-com bubble burst in the year 2000. These were all fits and starts in the inflation of the money bubble, which was finally ready to burst again after 2006. To avert that, after 2008, the money bubble was inflated to previously unimaginable levels. That might seem like a good thing, but it isn't. Because what goes up must eventually come down. Almost parallel recession events to those in the USA occurred in the UK from the 1970s to 2008. No surprise, really, since the UK is also a major beneficiary of the money bubble. If the oligarchy have managed to distract you from the great financial crisis of 2006 to 2008, then no doubt you'll have also forgotten the dot-com crash. The dot-com bubble bursting would have been even worse, except for the events that happened in New York on 9/11. After the collapse of the World Trade Center's buildings, the US central bank, still governed by Alan Greenspan, opened the floodgates. It cut interest rates dramatically and made it clear to all concerned that it was there to backstop the economy with easy money. It took a while, but the massive infusion of credit set off another bubble, this one in housing. Home prices soared. Banks offered mortgages to virtually anyone and then packaged the increasingly low-quality loans into mortgage-backed bonds and sold them, and derivatives based on them, to institutions around the world. Ratings agencies, which in a truly amazing conflict of interest get paid by the issuers of these bonds, gave AAA ratings to pretty much everything that came their way, often without even looking at the underlying mortgages. Homeowners began using their houses like 14, like ATMs, extracting cash via home equity credit lines and using the proceeds to buy cars, vacations, and more houses. The lunacy of the dot-com bubble, a sign of the crack-up boom, was thus covered by injecting money into other parts of the economy. Even in the UK, there was the equivalent of a subprime mortgage scandal. Or the scandal, I should say. In the USA, in 2008, the Treasury Secretary, formerly of Wall Street bank Goldman Sachs, stated that unless taxpayers bail out the banks with several $1 trillion, the entire global financial system would implode. The US Congress and the White House enacted the largest taxpayer bailout in the history of the world. And that is going to be where we end it, on page 208. And I did not think that I would be breaking my record of strokes. 14! Christ! It was a bad day for me then. I'm surprised I haven't just straight up had a heart attack, quite frankly. So 14 strokes in, what, a 48-minute period is, I would say, just over a stroke every 3 minutes and 15 seconds. I believe that's, if my calculations are correct, and now I'm bloody going to have to do the calculations. So 48 times 60, and then divide that by... no, that's not right. Fuck. How do I calculate this shit again? It's pretty close to what I estimated. It's around like a stroke every 3 minutes 15 seconds or 3 minutes 20 seconds, something like that. So, yeah. New record. Christ almighty, this is not what I want to hear. Not what I want to hear at all. I've upped it by like 40%. Oh dear, oh bloody dear, I'm getting old. No, I'm not going to say it's because I'm overweight, because that means I have to take responsibility. So... I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to say it. So, yeah, but that's another session of the book read. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm probably sure there's been quite a lot of entertainment from my quote-unquote suffering because of the strokes and what have you. But I've got my Dungeons and Dragons to look forward to this evening. That was what Martin was messaging me about earlier, so I've got that to look forward to. Wish you all a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you one last time for watching. See you all in the next one. Bye-bye for now.